We are lighting the candle, a world that works. I am Bill Correll, still and again, and I've got with me one of my best buddiettes in the world after a little bit of a hiatus for the last week or two, Jan Jeremias. And I'm so looking forward to having a conversation with you today, Jan. There's so much for us to possibly cover. And based on kind of like how I'm feeling today, and what we were just talking about before we got online here, I like to consider in the vein of all things empowering and all things for people who are having a little bit of problem with stress and that sort of thing. Why don't we discuss inspiring people we've known? How does that sound?
Or have not known. I love that idea. I was on an audio I lead an audio event on Fridays called Fusion Friday, and we were talking about, we were talking about the divine feminine energy, like the feminine energy, which is the creative energy, which is energy of flow, and we were talking about that, and we were talking about those qualities and where, sort of like the divine energy manifested in people. And yes, you can go back to ancient figures, but we ended up choosing people that, if we hadn't met, that just seemed to personify from all backgrounds, from all age groups. They just had this resilience and this fortitude and just this ability. And they brought such great, what I feel was great gifts to the world. And so it was kind of a really interesting. So, based on that, I'd love to bring up some of those people. I mean, we chose all women. It was like that divine feminine energy manifested in women, but I mean, it could be just those people who you find inspirational, and maybe you know them and maybe you've never met them and they just have influenced your life.
I love it. And as expansive as we can be in our conversations, that's the limits I'd like to put on it.
Mhm. Okay.
And as I said jokingly to Jan as I was just getting ready to start recording, and Jan said, "What do you think we'll talk about today?" And I said, "How about we do this new thing where we just sort of make it up as we go along?" Of course,
Absolutely.
that's what we've been doing for 2 years, ladies and gentlemen. And partly because when we get together, whoever we have on the podcast with us, we typically make up. Um, I'm just going to toss a number out there. We typically make up over 100 years worth of experience in a lot of things that matter to people. So when you get a couple of old buds and buddiettes, getting together and talking, and now we've got this whole field of conversation with inspirational people we've known and some that we haven't known. And quite frankly, Facebook is full of inspirational people that we haven't known in person, but hopefully they said some of the things that they are purportedly saying on Facebook. But so in terms of who's been inspiring me lately, I would like to give credit to my nephew.
Mm.
And although I'm never quite sure exactly where people are coming from in terms of how they express themselves, I'm very, very interested in the level of commitment that he's expressed, with these things going on at the different college campuses right now and what has caused all of that. And I'm far less interested in having the conversation of the pros and the cons and the who's and the whats, but more about how I, am very impressed with how positively some people that I love are dealing with it, if you will. And you may or may not recall that several of the parts of my family tree have Native Americans associated with them, either by marriage, from my sister, or, you know, by marriage, my daughter, and obviously my grandsons. So it's really kind of interesting from the standpoint of something for me to learn when I see a behavior in a relative, who is conducting himself in a way that I've not seen before. And I would say, from my humble vantage point as a listener for a change, it's quite inspiring to me. And this young man, my nephew, is about 40 years old, thereabouts, and he's got challenges in his life, but he still has a heart that's big enough to hold enough pain and love for thousands of people that he's never met. And that to me is that's just plain cool.
Mhm. No, absolutely. Anything else you'd like to share? Like what's unique, like you say, about the way he's handling it? Just to, I don't know, for me, I'm curious when you say that, what that means per se.
So I'm going to put it into metaphorical terms. Facebook is really great for metaphors. And one of my most recent memes that I'm very taken with is surround yourself with people who will defend you against all comers in rooms that you're not present. So if you let that sink in, I think whenever somebody is defending someone who's not able to show up and defend themselves, I think it's a conversation worth listening to in my book,
Mhm.
especially if that person can conduct themselves or herself, himself, whatever, in a manner that is not blame throwing in terms of whether you agree with them or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, the coin of the realm today for a conversation to go from I believe X and someone to say, well, I believe Y, so we can't be friends, or you're a gunky, or whatever. Rarely does somebody say, oh, why do you believe Y? What's up with that? Can you share that with me so maybe I can learn something? I look far and wide for people to do that behavior or something approximating it. And when it's a loved one who I know simply because of who I am in the world and who I am in their family and in their eyes, I command a certain respect because of my age and because of the stories around me. Sometimes respect, sometimes disrespect and disdain, whatever else is in the family lore. So to kind of put a little finer point on it, when I posted a meme that was pretty innocuous saying that I supported a certain group of people. And then I got a response to that, which was that I was mistaken in terms of where I was placing my support because they were doing evil in the world. Um, and so I said, tell me more about that. How are these people responsible for that? And so we took it offline. And he said, first of all, I love you, Uncle Bill, and I will not, have a public debate with someone that I love. Number one, ladies and gentlemen, these days, that's freaking inspiring. Not important for him to win an argument online and puff his chest out. He wanted to be heard.
I'm trying to make a heart emoji.
I'm getting goosebumps with you doing that too, because I'm fighting back the tears thinking about what that means in terms of someone else in the world being willing to listen for a moment and then actually tell me, not just because I'm wrong and I really am not worth the time it takes to explain to me. And then I distinguished for him the group of people that I publicly am supporting have nothing to do with the other people that he's convinced are doing wrong in the world. And he took a real close look at it, and then he took down his comments on my meme, and he came back afterwards and he said, you know what, Uncle Bill, you're right. you know I looked at this more closely, and you're absolutely correct that the folks that I'm upset with, they're not the same group of people. They are connected by religion, but they are not the same people. And that just gave me so much more than talking about his most recent uh, exploits in fishing, and other things that he does, but he's such a genuine young man all the time and constantly putting his best foot forward and constantly giving thanks to family and ancestors and the way of life. I learned from that type of behavior in those comments. I really do. I learned from it. That's inspiring to me, Jan.
No, I love that, and thank you for clarifying that and giving that beautiful, beautiful metaphor, because I think that that is, that at least for me, that brought home what you were trying to, what you were trying, it gave me a concrete like example of what was happening.
Yes.
And so that's being like a visual and storytelling type person, I think that that was really, really, really beautiful. Um, you know, I think if I think of, I think that you find inspiring people like we were talking about before, of all ages, doesn't matter age, doesn't matter, background. Um, I think they're, if you look for them, they're out there, because I think we're around them every day.
Right.
My closest friend's son is a, well, I wanted to say, has had a very, I mean, he's like 24, but has had a very, very profound medical journey, health journey for his life. And I always look at him, and it's like with this attitude and this kind of stoicism. Most recently, he had surgery last week at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Um, and and I called her yesterday, and we were chatting for a little while about how he's doing and stuff. And, and she's always like, he is amazing. And I just look at him, and just this, this kid, definitely young person who has been through health wise so much in such a really, in almost all of his life. And, and I find him inspiring. I mean, he's taught me so much. I think if I look at people like that, from what's important to, how he looks at health, and, just, that's really where that's where I get inspired, and that's what's taught me so much about the type of what I view health as, and the responsibility that we each have, kind of like our own responsibility. Yes, has he had a lot of different doctors through the years? Yeah, but he does take responsibility for taking care of himself and trying to keep himself as healthy as possible on his end, with this idea of knowing that, you know, for him, I mean, I don't know if he would have survived had he not taken such personal responsibility.
Yeah.
And so that to me is inspiring.
I completely get it. And I think one of the things um, that sometimes we don't give people enough credit for, Jan, is just the decision to continue. You know,
Mhm.
we all have that choice. I mean, you and I both have been around folks that when they felt like their time was close to the end, they kind of curled up in a ball and that was it. And that was cool. It's their call, even though the rest of us are all saying, "Come on, man, you got this. One more time," you know? But
And
when somebody says,
I
"This is not gonna beat me," or "I don't know what I'm gonna do next, but bring it because we gotta do the next thing." Like,
mm,
they're engaged and they're going nowhere until they can't speak anymore, and that is inspiring. I completely get it.
yeah, and then there are people I think that are in our lives, or that we either read or whatever, you know, that are just, or we read about, that we just consider these people who are very, who have influenced us in a very profound, profound way.
Yes.
And, whether those be people throughout history. And yes, you're getting sort of like a knowledge based on maybe a book that was written by them or about them. But either way, however they're portrayed is this way of that really brings inspiration to you. I was
Yeah.
talking I was talking, earlier with a friend, and we were talking about and I said that one of the people that in this audio event that when we chatted about women was that were had a great influence or whatever throughout history. One of the people that came up was Anne Frank, who, who wrote this, who basically kept a diary, which has influenced so many people, and it ended up passing away at the age of 15. So was she old? No, but she left this message that kind of surpassed her, not maybe even intending, she probably never thought that her diary would be used,
Yeah.
um, as a historical reference, basically, and as a beacon of hope or, for so many other people. And
Yes.
so just this idea of sometimes we have no idea of the legacy we leave and how that influences us and other people.
So, at the essence of that, it's just neat. And while we're thinking about people who we don't know, I'm really tempted to read Great Expectations again. I've re-fallen in love with Dickens' character Pip,
Mhm.
and I think that the way the words are strung together in a couple of instances are they're sleepers, man. They are like these little time bombs that if you just let it hang there and kind of be with it for a while, there's a half a dozen different ways, to have ahas. And like for instance, I'll give you a quote that I was listening to. Um, Pip is saying, in a word, I was too cowardly to do what I knew to be right, because I had been too cowardly to avoid doing what I knew to be wrong. Holy crap. Who hasn't been there? But who would ever accuse themselves of cowardice? So, so here is this character with the opportunity to pretend what he did was either A, not cowardly, or B, he didn't recognize it as cowardice, or C, just ignore it altogether. And articulately being, so self aware to be able to say, of course, he uses more than a word, but cowardly is the operative word in the sentence. Too cowardly to do what I knew was right. And how many people find themselves in that situation? Sometimes being silent is that cowardice, you know? Um, so there's that.
And if we
And
go to classics or let's say the written word,
yes,
um, I am I love poetry and and one of the probably the greatest influencers on my life was Mary Oliver, the poet Mary Oliver, who had this appreciation for the earth and for nature that kind of reformulated or remolded the way I began to look at the earth that surrounds me and the planet Earth. And
right.
I know that, having seen interviews with her and having gone to hear a few really quite famous poets, they remind me of like songwriter. They are writing songs, but without music, um, lyrics basically. Um, but they have this ability to string words together, which really touch your heart. I always say, I think that when and I know the first poem that I read or was read to me by her,
Yes.
um, which I read the other day, and I think it was like the first, like one of the first readings that I had ever read, or times I had been read to, where I actually had tears. Like I actually could cry in a second when I read her. It just has this ability to break my heart like wide open, and I'm just like, okay, and just a profound way of looking at the world with appreciation.
Yeah. I've got another one that means worlds different in language for me today than it did when I read it probably the first time when I was 12 or whatever age that was. Couldn't have been more than seventh or eighth grade. I won't read the whole thing, but the final verse, I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and
Mhm.
I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
Love that. I love that. I love it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I think Mr. Frost has imprinted a lot of people, including Paul Simon.
Yes, I mean, I love that. And then for me, um, the Mary Oliver poem I was referring to was called Wild Geese.
Yep.
And she says, "You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves." And there was something about that phrase, um, that just, in her description of nature, in the last line, "Wherever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like wild geese." I just, her words, like I'm like I said, like tears, and just right away I was just like, whew. And I felt like I think I noticed how narrowly I was looking at the world. Um, and that all of a sudden she opened my eyes to a much broader world.
Yeah. Yep. Message delivered.
Yeah, it's just something very, and I agree with you, Frost. And then there are some other where language and words were just so consciously chosen, I want to say.
Yep.
There was a deliberateness in the language that was used. Um, it reminds me of, if you look at the Old Testament and you look at words, there are multiple words that have similar meanings, and they chose the word they chose for a reason.
Yep.
And it's, what was the difference, which might have been very, very slight, in the word chosen and why they chose that word. And when you said Dickens, I mean, I love Dickens, and that's what it reminds. Dickens was like that. eh,
He
you know.
he didn't lecture. His power was in short sentences. For example, um, so throughout life, our worst weaknesses and meannesses are usually committed for the sake of people whom we most despise. And if you stop and think about it, for many of us, being pushed into a behavior that was not a natural action for us was more likely at the result of someone putting pressure or someone threatening or some type of a behavior that caused us to do something that we felt less than who we were before we heard it or before we took the action. You almost never regret things that you do for people you love.
Right, or it was done based on expectation, or, um, I wanna say, depending on who asked or whatever, based on agenda,
Right.
and their agenda, obviously. But I had, long ago when I had done some, was reading a lot of Dickens and everything. It was also very interesting that he didn't like they were actually published originally as almost like magazine articles, a lot of them. They weren't published as a full book.
A
Like they
serial, yes.
Yeah, they were published as, like basically chapter 1 was like or whatever was, an independent and then chapter 2 kind of like, you know, and so when you even think about it like that it had a very different flavor because they weren't sitting around and reading the whole thing all at once. They would read it and get to kind of sit with it, and probably depending on how like readily available they were, might be some period of time before you got to find out what the next what would happen next.
Yes.
So they left a lot up to this, like there was a real opportunity for reflection and for personal interpretation in that kind of the way it flowed. It wasn't like, oh, chapter 1, chapter two's right at the next page kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah, when you think about the opening line in A Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. You can
Mhm.
stop right there and let the reader construct mentally what comes next, you know? And they can't get it wrong.
Right.
It
Right,
it
right.
just
No,
so communicates, right?
I and I love that, because I don't know if I ever really thought about the fact that there was that pause, I mean, I think poetry does that in one essay. I was listening to Ada Limon, who was the poet laureate, and she said, "Poetry is words with breath." And I thought, "Oh," like, all of a sudden, because you have, like, the lines break at a certain point that is odd sometimes, and that's really when you're supposed to breathe. And I thought, "Oh my gosh, how cool is that?" Coming from someone who thinks about breathing all the time because of the yoga and meditation and all that kind of
Yes.
stuff. I was like, "Oh my gosh." But I love the idea that and now I think that that is part of what's missed and part of what's missing in our society is that everything happens so quickly. Like you can binge watch a whole series or 3 series, if you want it, like, all in one sitting if you want to.
Yeah, and that's a little bit like eating a bowl of popcorn until it's gone, you know what I mean? There's not
Absolutely.
much time to really appreciate each bite, is there?
No, and there's not much time to actually sit and contemplate or whatever. And I remember, like I said, I've met a number of poets, and I remember having followed a poet for many, many years, probably close to 20 years, 15 years. And then I actually went to a reading that he did. It was actually right before COVID. I went to a reading he did where he read the poetry that I'd been reading for 15 years. And he talked about what he meant when he wrote the poem. And I was so thankful that I didn't know that. Like, I got to sort of sit with this poem because almost all the poems that he read, I knew, that I
Yes.
got to sit with the poems for the last 15 years, and I got to interpret them for myself and then hear what he meant and what he was going through at the time, which was really interesting. And I was so happy that I had that afterwards, that I hadn't heard him speak once. It's kind of like watching a movie and then going back and reading the book. It's that same thing where you know, when you read the book or you see an author interviewed about their book, it's very different than watching, whatever rendition is brought to film necessarily, unless they're absolutely, it's just very different.
Well, yeah, and one of the things that happened a lot more for our generation, I think, maybe since then up through the 70s and possibly 80s, we almost always read the book before seeing the movie.
Hmm.
And in a lot of cases, the movie just could not stack up with the absolute fantastic images that were created, in our imaginations from the words on the page.
Hmm.
And I've heard that over and over and over from people that sometimes, like for instance, just watching the A Christmas Carol, right? It's been made and remade, probably 20 different times in the last 100 years. And I know people that try to watch every single performance that they possibly can. And part of the reason for that is that that just completely adds to the body of knowledge and experience of all of the different characters, because technically the early movies are not quite as great, with the spirits and all the rest of that sort of thing. They do look like people that are dressed up in costumes. And not only that, the delivery of the lines and the performances of the main characters and actors. And I think Jim Backus is one of those people who was fortunate enough to play it straight, as himself, an actor being, Scrooge, and then also to do it as Mr. Magoo. And not only are the stories slightly changed in terms of the screenplay, the delivery of the lines is quite different too, you know?
One of the I mean, I happen to, I love most of the versions I've seen, and I remember but as far as plays go, I remember my favorite was when I got to see Patrick Stewart do it because he does all the roles, he does
Yeah.
all the characters, and I think I was just in awe of that whole kind of thing where he could be on stage alone and play like a multitude of characters and everything, which brought something very different. And because I think what it showed you is that every character, like every person has the qualities of all the characters within them. You know, we all have that part of ourselves that we might call the greedy part of us, and we all have the part of ourselves which is kind of like the innocent and and so it just reminds us that that's part of being human. We possess so many different aspects of qualities within ourselves, and that's kind of a beautiful thing. It's kind of like the Wizard of Oz in the fact that, oh my gosh, like we all have that, we all have courage and cowardly, we all have brains, and yet, like, kind of what do you might call like that kind of what do you want to call lack of brains or whatever? I don't want to say. And then we all have hearts, and then we all have times when that's not where we lead from. And so it just shows you, we all possess all those things, which is what that when I got to see Patrick Stewart in A Christmas Carol, that's what it did for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll tell you what, there are performances of Peter and the Wolf when we were growing up where all the same kind of thing with one actor. I'm kind of smitten with when we talk about inspirational acting. I'm smitten with people who are classically trained in Shakespearean theater. Like
Mhm.
that's their first thing they do,
Right.
and they are they're a little bit different, if they've come through Juilliard or they've come through, one of the other big name, character actor trainers. But for example, Kelsey Grammer, he has been able to successfully pull off, somebody who was believably part of the elite establishment, if you will, as a doctor, and not only a doctor, a snooty one who, and this is not probably who he is in real life. He's probably one of the warmest guys and uses, just regular cadence in speaking. However, when he adopts the voice and goes into the mode, whether he's playing the mayor of Chicago in the series The Boss, or he is playing Dr. Fraser Crane, or some of the other really cool things that I've seen him do over the years, especially when he's being evil. You know, he's so capable of pulling that off and being so believable.
Mm. Yeah, I do agree with you. I think there's something about being classically trained, and that really goes to their style and their adaptability in character.
Yep.
Um, and then it's interesting because I was reading really, and then so if we move on to as we were talking about actors and everything. And then I think there are just these people who I read an article recently about Michael J. Fox, and and to me, this, basically this man who has become a voice for a group of individuals who, and what he has done for the um the ability or the shift over to being able to talk about um a really challenging topic and be vulnerable enough to get out there and um to do that, which I think has changed a lot of the scope of not only medical issues such as like Parkinson's, but also other medical conditions. I think we have the ability to communicate those a lot more easily than we used to.
I agree with you, and that's another example of somebody who has played the gamut, you know,
Yes, absolutely.
and it makes him that much more relatable when he is talking about a serious subject or a serious topic, because he has, to one degree or another, and I think as late as last year, I saw him um, in a situation, uh, weekly series where he's picked up a role. They're not going to lean on him too much for his part of it, but
Right.
he's still able to get out there and do it. And you've got folks like him, Muhammad Ali, Bruce Willis. Uh, these are impact players with different genres, and Ali was never really much of an actor, although he was in several movies, typically playing himself. But
Right.
quite frankly, as time got, you get somebody who's risen to the ultimate of their craft, who is humbled by some type of a health challenge like that, and they just don't ever give up.
Yeah, and they're very, I mean, he's been very outspoken and very vulnerable. And I think that people, it's given a new, I think it's kind of reframed it for a lot of people.
Yep.
But, and I think of him, I think about a few other people when you were talking about um, actor Christopher Reeves, was another one that I thought was very kind of, you know, outspoken about his condition. And it's just this idea, and I love that because it does, I don't know, it does, with all the challenges, there's also some humor that comes out when they talk about it. And that's sometimes the key is like, during hard times, like when you do something and everything, your ability to kind of laugh at yourself
Yeah.
and realize, obviously it's not funny, but realize, oh my gosh, like look at what I did, or look at the fact that, you know, yeah, it's just, there's something beautiful about that to me anyway.
Yeah, and while you're talking, my brain is firing, and I'm thinking about people who had major shifts in careers. For example, Sonny Bono. For a really interesting example. Uh, he and Cher had a highly successful television show. He dealt with the breakup of that marriage. And for him, it was not only a marriage that was broken up, but it was his income that was dramatically uh, affected by the two of them. Not, I mean, they performed together after they were divorced for a while, but somehow he and Clint Eastwood took this, deal of, wouldn't it be kind of cool to be a mayor, for a little while, just see, Clint Eastwood in Carmel, and of course Sonny was, I think, in Palm Springs. And what that means is these guys who are typically kind of reclusive and by themselves because of their fame and also their notoriety at different times for being outspoken on different subjects. They had to be available for council meetings, and they had to be available for the average layperson to show up and for idiot reporters to come in and ask them stupid questions, you know? And I was always thinking that I'd love to see Mr. T, mayor of some city. That would be a whole heck of a lot of fun. The comedic value of that really would be a lot more than the comedic value of the governor of California when Arnold was doing that.
Very funny. No, I mean, I think that it's interesting when you get people who are in the public eye and then all of a sudden, all of a sudden have a change in perspective or a change in focus for whatever reason they choose to do it.
Yep.
That change in career. Um, because it's interesting just because I was having this conversation with a friend of mine who now went out and does a lot of healing work and Reiki and things like that. And she was a nurse. And when we were talking one day, I don't know what comment I made about her nursing career, but it was more or less to the effect that nothing you ever do is wasted. Like, yeah, it's not like I woke up one day and I said, okay, well, my scientific career is done now. Yes, per se, it's not practically, I'm not whatever, but it's very much a part of what I do. And it's a
Right.
part of who I am. And so it's just interesting though, because people are so like, okay, this is what I was and this is what I am now. But it doesn't work like that.
Nope.
It's not like you can take it out, like, okay, I'm done. I'm going to amputate this now.
Right.
Basically,
Right.
that's the image that comes to mind. It's kind of like, okay, did that, I'm
Life
done.
out that part. We ain't doing no more science. Oh.
That's right. Okay, it's gone. I mean, I can't. All my friends will say to me, Jan, once a scientist, always a scientist, because that's the way my brain thinks, and that's
Agreed.
the way, but it's funny because as like human beings, we do have this feeling of like, okay, that is what I quote unquote did, and it's not possible to separate it out.
No. How would you even know?
How would you even know exactly?
No, and the other neat thing is that I want to believe of the things that I can believe that it takes all of your experience to be able to process what you process today, how you process it, and what you're left with. And tomorrow, given everything else being the same, now that you're not necessarily the same person any longer, and then that's really true of next year and 10 years from now, I think that's where the juice of life is that things that hit you a certain way, or I'm speaking for me, things that hit me a certain way when I was 30 or 25, they've got a completely different impact for me right now. Like the Pip Dickens quote that I read earlier, that resonates with just so much more color, and it's so much more of a robust, powerful sentence than just hearing the words and like, oh, that's interesting. Don't have a clue what it means. Now there's something inside of me that is at the same frequency and wavelength that it resonates with, you know?
Absolutely. But I just think of what you said in the beginning, which was basically about life. And I had this conversation last week with my sister-in-law. I said, because people will say to me, oh, do you wish you were younger? And then I'm heavily talking about longevity, and that's a big field now,
Yes.
the longevity. And I said, sometimes I wish physically, maybe there were like certain things as I age that I really wish that we're not around. But I said basically experience and who I am now, I would not want to go backwards. Like,
Yeah.
I'm very happy being my age
Yeah.
and having what I would call like the wisdom that I've gained through the years and the experiences, I wouldn't want to give that up. I wouldn't. I'm sorry. I'll keep what I have, and I'll just, like, and you said it, just that experience and that interpretation of looking at something. That's why, sometimes going back and rereading a book or rereading a poem, and all of a sudden you read it and it's as if you're reading it for the first time. You're
Yes.
like, oh, like now I get it. Like there's that little aha moment where you read a line and you're like, oh, okay, now it seems like it means this to me.
Yeah, and
Listening
I
to
I
a song
I
has the same.
recommend it.
Yeah, and listening to a song, I think, has the same experience. There is that feeling of, "Oh, now I understand what these lyrics really mean something to me now."
The one I've been doing lately is finding out what the real lyrics actually are for songs
Alright, yeah,
I
right,
only
right.
heard on the radio, and I'm saying to my wife, I'm going, "I didn't know that those were the words to that song."
Oh, that isn't that funny when you, like, all of a sudden you, like, listen to you hear what the words really are.
Yeah, there's so much available in the distinctions of the intended message of the author. And if you're going to read and you're going to read to like speed skim down the center of the page, I'm really wondering if there's value to that. Like in many, many instances, I mean, I can't even imagine for a minute reading Tolstoy or Melville or some of the classic stuff that's out there. Even looking at Aldous Huxley or Isaac Asimov, if you don't let the words land and bounce and splash, then have you wasted your time? You could have done something else. Get the damn cliff notes, and call it a day.
No, it is true. Um, and it is really interesting when you go back and you look at things a second time, a third time, or
Yeah,
more, because there's this experience that happens, like I said, is like all of a sudden it is really that moment when you say, "Oh, I didn't see that. I didn't realize that the first time around or the
yeah,
second time around." And that basically comes with who we are at the moment we read it, you know, what we've gained, what wisdom or what has happened to us. Because there's always things that happen in our life that our experiences all of a sudden mold us in different ways. And so when we read something or encounter something, all of a sudden it takes on new meaning.
yeah, yeah. I was listening to. We're talking about both two things. One, um, last evening we watched a thing called Astronaut Farmer or Farmer Astronaut. Astronaut Farmer was his last name. Excellent movie. And the music at the end, the outro music was Elton John Rocket Man. And I could hear, you know, Rocket Man burning out his fuse up here alone. I looked at Janet and I go, for 50 years, I've been singing the wrong words. And this makes so much more sense. What Bernie Taupin wrote some words that were nonsensical, and he just strung things together a la, John Lennon. But what they did with them together, the whole package, is kind of like what it's like, again, when you were talking about books being made into a movie. There's a governor, like an engine governor, like that keeps you from going too high a speed in
Mhm.
certain types of things. The same kind of governor is there from a technical standpoint, or from the acting ability of the character's standpoint, or from the director's limitations in terms of their particular experience. But again, when you come back to somebody like a Patrick Stewart, at any moment can pick up and put on damn near as many different personalities and characters as a Robin Williams or a Jonathan Winters, you know? They all have this capacity to invent in the moment something that comes from somewhere that no one sees it coming.
I remember years ago, Robin Williams did Robin Williams live at the Met,
Yep.
and didn't see it in person, but went and rent at that time. Was a video cassette, so went and watched it. And at one point, we went back because we used to rent it all the time. And the guy said, "We're not, I don't have it anymore." And we were like, "What happened?" He said, "Because I got tired of replacing it. Like people would like rent it and then not return it because they loved it so much." But in that performance, where he had the ability to go and bounce from one character to another so easily, and you know it was just, I mean, it was, it was so priceless. And you were like sitting there, and then when we went back, and he's like, "Don't carry it anymore. Can't keep it in stock," basically.
Yeah. Yeah, there are some classic performances by a lot of um, stand-up comedians who, once they got into full-on movie media, have been able to do just about anything, and Jim Carrey is another one of those people.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say Jim Carrey.
Well, we do actually resonate on the same wavelength quite often.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say Jim Carrey. um there were just certain people who just had the ability to do that. I'm trying to think if there's what was his name? Hold on a second. But it was really, really true. And I think that, like you mentioned lyrics, because I think sometimes when you go back and you look at the lyrics of songs, there is that because with the music, sometimes it's really hard to tell what the lyrics really are. And, go back and listen to the lyrics, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
they have more meaning, more depth.
Yeah, and the discovery, and sometimes just that feeling of surprise, and a little bit startled, when something hits you and it goes, "No, they changed the words. There's no way that I've been doing that for 40 years."
Yes, yes, that is funny. But I think it doesn't have to be music, and it doesn't have to be the written word. I mean, I think art is very similar in the fact that, you can, it's like the difference between seeing a painting, over and over again that maybe you've seen before, or seeing a picture of a painting, for example, and then seeing it in person,
Right.
and what that means and what it feels like. And now, it's just that there is something really unique and special about being able to capture something visually like that. Love that.
Me too. So I think where we are right now is we've done that again. We've kind of stepped into a time warp. And I was originally thinking that we might go half hour, 45 minutes, but we're pretty darn close to an hour again. So,
I know. I know.
anything you want to say to sort of kind of wrap things up?
Yeah, I would encourage people to go out and see if you can do something that you've done before with new, kind of like I want to say with new eyes, like, or with, and that could be, that could be rereading the same book that you read, like you're talking about like something you didn't read since you were in high school, and now all of a sudden, you go back and you read Catcher in the Rye, like, or, you know,
Yeah.
book like that. It could be rewatching, a movie or listening or delving into the lyrics of a song. Or
Yes.
maybe it's going to the same place you've gone and trying to look at it with a new perspective. You know, you know, for example, I always love, you know, taking a hike, and if it's a circular hike, reversing the direction. In general, we always tend to go in the same direction. It's just habit or tendency. And then all of a sudden, when you take and the lighting is different, it's very different. Just to see what you notice.
Yeah. That's great.
So that's what I would encourage people to do. And
And,
then
and
let
what
us and then let us know how it goes. Like I'd love to hear from people.
exactly. Yeah, I think framing it with some intentionality is quite different than sitting down and watching a movie that you haven't seen before and like, let's see what happens. Um, when there's something that you're pretty sure that you kind of know most of what's there, it's cool to go back and challenge your memory, even sometimes of the most famous lines. And that happens in many many walks of life where people will say something to reference a movie, but those lines were never in that movie.
Mhm.
And that's cool. It's really cool because it's now become part of the lexicon. Part of our cultural uh, deal is we all know that if somebody says play it again, Sam, that's going to be from the movie Casablanca, but those words do not appear in the movie anywhere.
Well,
uh,
and I'm thinking about the words that do appear in movies, and then all of a sudden you're like everybody knows where the line, like leave the gun, take the cannoli.
yeah.
I mean, I don't know if everybody knows where that line is from.
Yep. Or
So,
frankly, Scarlett, I don't give a damn.
right,
Never
exactly.
got said. Was never in Margaret Mitchell's book, and it was not on the screenplay. It was actually, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. But, when somebody is telling the story to really get you into the Gone with the Wind mode, you have to say one of the characters' names, right? Well, with all of that said, we've given you enough coaching how to watch the next movie that you've seen 100 times before and have a little fun with it.
Absolutely.
And that ultimately is what we're doing here. We're trying to bring a little bit of stress relief, a little bit of fun, a little bit of love into your life so that as you're going through this, it's not all just racing from one stressful situation to the next. Stop and do this self care thing and examine what seems to be working for you. And again, if you need a hand from somebody, phone a friend. You will be surprised how many people are out there that you have no idea that they would love to give you a hand or even just listen to what you have to say on an occasion when you need to say it to someone.
hmm Absolutely.
So, with that said, I'm going to wish you all the best second week of May you've ever had and enjoy to the max. And by the way, do call someone and tell them that the world is great because they're here and it matters to you. So we're lighting the candle, a world that works. And bye bye from Bill Correll and
Jan Jeremias. Bye bye, everybody.
all right. Remember, you're loved.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.